Welcome everyone, Costin here with some of the best campaigns you can play in Total War Warhammer 3 once you've gotten some experience under your belt. I've given a list of some of the best beginner campaigns in the game. This is a list for people that have played the game somewhat, gained some experience. Now, when I say somewhat and experience, I'm not talking about people who have been playing Total War Warhammer since Warhammer 1 came out. I'm not talking people who have spent months and years of their lives playing this game series. I've been personally playing Total War since Rome 1 came out, so that's almost 20 years of experience playing Total War, and I've played every single game in the series. So I have a huge amount of experience when it comes to it, and for me a lot of the campaigns can be relatively easy. But for someone who's just started, maybe played a campaign, maybe played a couple of them, gotten a hold of the game, things are a bit different, very different when it comes down to that. So these are the campaigns I would recommend for people that have played the game a bit, gotten past some of those beginner experiences, and want something that's more interesting, more complex to deal with, a bigger challenge, a better campaign to deal with. So at number 5, we have Archaon the Everchosen, who is one of the most, if not the most powerful legendary lord in the game. But in order to make full use of his campaign power, you kind of need to know at least a bit what you're doing in the game. It can be a very easy campaign, but in order to make it so, you need to have a clue about what you're doing. So it's not a campaign for a completely new player. Certainly you can play it as a completely new player and you'll get away with it even, but in order to really make the full usage of his faction effects, the research rate, the diplomacy with demons of chaos and all that, per vassal, souls per vassal, then you need to have at least some kind of experience, because you can play Archaon and get very few vassals, or can play Archaon's campaign and get a truckload of vassals. Just to give you an idea, next to Archaon's starting position, you have one vassal you'll get for your first Dark Fortress. Then you have the Sinnelleos faction, so that's 2. The Khorne faction, 3. Boris, 4. Tzeentch, 5. The Demon Prince, 6. Nurgle, 7. The Dolgan, the Norscan, 8. The Skaven, 9. And then you go from there. Or, if you play this campaign, and then there's of course the Tong as well, who you will get for that particular Dark Fortress there. So you have the potential of getting a lot of vassals as Archaon and just steamrolling your campaign over here, but you need to be a bit careful. You need to be careful that you don't wipe out factions, or vassals don't wipe out factions, and you need to move in a specific way so that certain factions don't get wiped out by the AI, because what's going to happen over here is you have the Sinnelleos faction, and they can be easily wiped out by your vassals if you get multiple vassals in this particular campaign. Boris Ursus can also wipe out Khorne, and the Demon Prince can wipe out these factions. In fact, if you're playing as Archaon, your best bet in this campaign is to just take these factions initially, like take the Sinnelleos faction maybe as your first vassal, go then for Boris Ursus, because Boris Ursus only starts with 1 settlement. If you can take that settlement, you can subjugate him. Or you might even be able to avoid fighting his main army if you're quick and clever enough in this particular campaign. And then you can keep heading west, taking vassals as you go, as you encounter them. Another thing to mention about Archaon is he can forcefully confederate the other warriors of chaos factions. So to the east you have Kolek and Village. To the west, well, southwest you have Azazel. To the west you have, well, you have Sigvald, you have Valkia, you have a lot of the legendary lords of the Warriors of Chaos in your path, and you can gain all of them as part of your faction. But in order to really achieve that, I would say you kind of need to know what you're doing in order to really get the maximum potential out of this campaign. Now, this is something that I would say applied to pretty much every Warriors of Chaos campaign. Some just don't necessarily care about it. Like Be'lakor, do you really care about having a lot of vassals early on? Not necessarily so much. But as Archaon, you do care because you get significant faction-wide benefits like the research benefit, the diplomatic relations solves all that. So if you can get like 10 plus vassals within like say the first 20, 30 turns, then you're going to be a wrecking ball on the campaign, and nothing, not even the endgame crisis, will be able to stop you or even slow you down a bit, because even if your armies can't deal with what they've got in front of him, you just have each vassal producing a stack, or 2 stacks really, throwing that into the fray and becoming an unstoppable horde of death and destruction. That's the situation for Archaon. Another thing is you need to manage your vassals effectively, because if they become too powerful, especially in relation to you, and if you get engaged into many wars, that's another thing to bear in mind. If you start too many wars, then factions are not necessarily going to want to join in on that, and you can lose vassals. Like, it can happen. It's very rare. I personally haven't seen it happen in any of the campaigns I've played as the Warriors of Chaos, but people have stated that it can happen if you're not careful about your situation. So yeah, this is a campaign I would recommend people play once they've gotten some experience under their belt. And number 4, we have Lokhir Fellheart. Now, Lokhir is a really good legendary lord. Once you've gotten experience under your belt, you understand how to deal with certain mechanics in the game. And the reason he's a good legendary lord for a more experienced player is because he can get black arcs from every single port. Now, when it comes to black arcs, you need to be careful in how you use them, because they are floating armies. They can be attacked, they can be destroyed, well, temporarily. So you can lose quite a bit when it comes to them. But they do give you significant benefits in that they allow you, at tier 1, to recruit Black Arc Corsairs. And Lokhir's army is the best early game army, with the exception of Malice Darkblade being a one-man doomstack from turn 1. But it's the best Dark Elven army in the game. In fact, it's flat out one of the best armies you can get in the entire game from turn 1. Consider that for a moment. The reason behind it is because Black Arc Corsairs have high armor, high leadership, which tends to lend itself well in battle. Like, they have really good melee stats, and you can get them from the very first turn of your campaign if you're playing as Lokhir. That already is a substantial enough benefit. Secondly, is that Lokhir himself can get a ridiculous amount of money from looting and sacking settlements. Partly because the Dark Elves gain quite a bit from that, but also because he does have the Blessed Dread, which gives him 20% within the circle of influence of the Black Arc. So if I just move it here, I can sack Zishu and then get a lot of money. But it gets even better, because then you have the Slave Hold, then you have also a right for Lokhir that gives you income from sacking settlements plus 50%. It is a ridiculous amount of money you can gain with Lokhir if you're playing him from sacking settlements. And he does have some fairly good campaign benefits, mainly buffing Corsairs and really the pirate playstyle, or the raider playstyle, if you will, because as Lokhir, you can get such a ridiculous amount of money from just taking over settlements. Now, his early game isn't necessarily the very easiest in the game, because you do need to be a bit careful when it comes to some of the decisions. Dealing with the Vampire Coast in general, at least on Legendary, which is what I'm playing on, dealing with the Vampire Coast can be a bit of a problem, not because they have a powerful army, far from it, but rather because they can recruit quite a lot of units very quickly through the Raised End mechanic. And over here, the Dead Flag Fleet does have 3 settlements, 4 settlements if you consider Zizhu as well. So they do have quite a few settlements for you to capture, and it can be a bit annoying navigating the maze of Eastern Cathay, being Mount Lee, or the Jade River Delta. But once you get going as Lokhir, you get a really powerful army, or really powerful armies in general, a powerful economy, a truckload of money, as well as having a campaign in one of the best areas in the game over here in Cathay. Now, you can't take over all of Cathay because mountains are, for whatever reason, uninhabitable for you when you're playing as Lokhir. But another thing about this campaign that's great is you have a sea lane over here that will take you all the way to Lustra. So you can go to Lustra and you can conquer it. In fact, you might want to do so because your long campaign victory condition does require you to deal with the High Elves, with all of the High Elves. Maybe that should be changed because, you know, having to hunt down the Knights of Caledor, having to hunt down Teclis is a bit of an issue. Is something of an issue in both High Elven and Dark Elven campaigns. Like if you're playing a High Elf and Wolf one, having to chase down Rakarth and Lokhir isn't necessarily the best experience of your campaign, especially when it comes to achieving your long campaign victory condition. But it is a good campaign. It does have a lot of power. You just need to know what you're doing when it comes to Black Arcs to fully utilize the power of them, because the power is there. Like, they also allow you, what the real power of Black Arcs isn't just that you can recruit some really powerful units from the very start. It's also the fact that you can recruit every kind of hero from them. You can recruit lords, so you can have a mobile army that also has a lord following it, so that when you do want to go on further inland beyond the port, you can give the army in the Black Arc, which has a minus 50% upkeep by default and goes all the way to minus 60%, and then you have to consider the 6% for specific units. Like, you know, I could get a minus 6% upkeep for Black Arc Corsairs, for Reaper Bolt Throwers, all that kind of good stuff. So there's a lot of power to be had in this particular campaign. I would say it is the best Dark Elven campaign. Yes, Malice Darkblade is far more powerful and all that, but at the same time, just the sheer early game potential does make this campaign really powerful, but you kind of need to know what you're doing. You need to approach this campaign under the idea that you're going to sack a lot of settlements, and you also need to be careful about the situation with public order, or rather control, when you're playing this campaign, because the Dark Elves do have a bit of an issue, or a major issue when controlling. You can keep it under check, you can handle it when it comes to the control issue, but you do need to know what you're doing to really fully utilize the power that Lokhir does have. And number 3, we have Alarielle the Radiant, who, in my mind, is the natural upgrade after you've played that campaign as Tyrion. So Tyrion is one of the best campaigns for a complete beginner to the game. Alarielle is just a natural upgrade to that. A bit more difficult than Tyrion, but still a pretty good campaign with a lot of power behind it. And in fact, I'd argue that Alarielle is actually stronger than Tyrion on the campaign side of things. Like, Tyrion will have a much better army in battles because he personally is more powerful as a lord than battles, but Alarielle will be much better on the campaign side of things. But how is that? Sure, she has a complicated situation here with Ikari, with Scourge of Cain, and maybe Noctilus himself will attack. She also has an annoying campaign mechanic with the Defender of Wolf 1 situation, where you need to try and control, and you need to ensure that all of Wolf 1 is controlled by the High Elves to get certain benefits, or else you're going to have these issues of control, construction cost, income from buildings. So those can be an issue, and this is why I wouldn't recommend this campaign for a complete beginner, because you need to get control of Wolf 1 to get rid of these issues, improve your campaign situation, or else you're going to suffer from it economically. Here's the thing about Alarielle, though. Faction-wide benefits, the most important thing that she has, she does gain bonuses when all of Wolf 1 is held by the High Elves. She does get negatives, okay. She also leaves bonuses in regions she visits, so influence, control, growth, corruption. So she does have the ability to grow very quickly in her campaign. She also starts with the Gaian Vale and can take over magical forests. That bit about magical forests may be pretty important in the very, very long term, because if you want to, you can conquer all of Avalorian and make it an incredibly good part of your empire from an economic perspective. But that's a very long-term benefit when it comes to the Everqueen. She does start with the tier 2 settlement, so one of the things she can do early on in the campaign is get the Elven Gardens for nobles, and as well as, of course, get the exotic animal tamers. She also has, and only she can use this, she also has this particular chain in the Gaian Vale, which gives her access to Treekin, Treemen, so she has some of the most powerful monstrous units in the entire game. Like, these Treekin are incredibly good in a campaign. Like, Dryads, not worth it so much, but when it comes to Treekin, really, really good units. She also has a benefit when it comes to Sisters of Avalorn, as well as handmaidens. Like her lord effects, if we look at the situation, it's the Radiant, so she gets 15% missile strength for Sisters of Avalorn and Handmaiden units. It's not really going to count when it comes to Handmaiden. Her skill line, she does get 2 control, Leader of the Court, 15 diplomatic relations with the High Elves, hero capacity with +1 for Handmaidens, hero recruitment for Handmaidens, all provinces, as well as the Spiritual Defender, which gives you a recruitment duration -1 for -1 turn for Sisters of Avalorn. You could go with Blood and Fire, but I don't necessarily recommend it. Sure, it would make you more powerful in battle, but the campaign-wide benefits that you do get over here are worth it more from traditions dictates versus Blood and Fire, from my perspective. Crucially, she does have 2 hero capacity for Handmaidens, so she can get a lot of them from pretty early on in her campaign. Like once you get to rank 12, and if you save the skill points, you can recruit a lot of Handmaidens, and you start with 1. So you can have the ability to get 2 hero types pretty quickly in your campaign, because you can get the noble after 2 turns, your first noble after 2 turns, and you can get and you do start with the Handmaiden. That is a pretty good amount of power that you do have, and you can get more Handmaidens than anyone else. Now, why are Handmaidens so very important in a campaign? Well, it's their skill line. They do have a choice over here between Protector of the Everqueen, Lieutenant of the Everqueen, or Diplomat of the Everqueen. Well, the Diplomat of the Everqueen is the most important one, because it gives you 2 diplomatic relations with High Elves, then 2 diplomatic relations with all factions, and 5% income from trade tariffs, as well as 1 influence per turn. For each of them, that gets to rank 12. Then there's control to all provinces. For each of them. Yes, 1 control to all provinces for every single one of them. And by default, you start with 1. You can get 3 more, 2 from the faction benefits, 1 from Alarielle's skill line. So you're looking at 4 Handmaidens. That's 4 control, 8 diplomatic relations, 20% to trade tariffs. That is a significant amount of power that Alarielle has in her campaign. And it doesn't stop there. So she has a really good, some really good melee units, some benefits to the best range units in the High Elven roster. She has she's the only one that can recruit these treekin and tree men in her campaign. I will not bother with dryads, by the way. But it goes even further than that, much further than that. See, typically speaking, when it comes to Handmaidens and Sisters of Avalorn, you would need the tier 4 structure. For every other High Elven Legendary Lord, it's basically the tier 4 upgrade of the Greater Grove, which Alarielle doesn't have, because she has the Handmaidens Gallery. So she has the capacity at tier 3 to recruit Sisters of Avalorn, one of the best range units and one of the best units flat out in the High Elven roster at tier 3, and she also has the capacity at tier 3, so from all the minor settlements, all the major ones as well, to increase her hero capacity for Handmaidens. That is what makes Alarielle a really good Legendary Lord, because, as I stated, Handmaidens are really good to have in a campaign. They're not the best fighters. The nobles are much better than them when it comes to their combat potential, and I would use them more for their melee potential as opposed to their range potential. Forget using ranged heroes, but these benefits, like 2 diplomatic relations with allies, 2 diplomatic relations with all factions, you can get so many alliances, so many trade agreements, crucially. This is the important bit. High Elves thrive on trade, but you need good diplomatic relations to get those kind of trade agreements. Well, the Handmaidens, the large swarm of them that you can have in a campaign, will help you with that a great deal. And I would say that Alarielle certainly does tend to do better in the very early game than Tyrion. Yes, Tyrion himself, he's a much better fighter, but Alarielle has a lot better access to diplomacy. Once she gets Treekin at tier 3, once she starts pumping out Sisters of Avalorn, Handmaidens, and Treekin, she has one of the best armies for the High Elves in the early game and in the mid game, crucially. So at the critical points of the campaign, she's gonna be much better than Tyrion. By the way, these Treekin you start with, they have an important trait. They have siege attackers. So you could give these to a secondary army to use them to besiege settlements, because getting access to siege as the High Elves can be a bit complicated, because you do need to have a tier 3 settlement, and then you need to spend a slot on a structure that you don't necessarily need for anything else to just get Eagle Claw bolt throwers. And of course, you can confederate Tyrion. He does have some really sweet effects once he gets to a certain rank.
Welcome.
And obviously
What
that
brings
is
you
going to
here?
be
As you
worth
say.
it. Though the complication in the campaign is you do have these downsides. If you don't control Ulthuan and you start with them, you need to try and unify and hold all of Ulthuan under the High Elves very quickly in your campaign, which can be something of an issue when trying to deal with the myriad of threats, specifically Be'lakor over here to the north, Marathi to the west, all that kind of stuff. So it can be a bit complicated, but there is a significant amount of power to be had in this campaign. And number 2, you have Azhag the Slaughterer. This might be a bit of a surprising choice for quite a few people, but Azhag does have a lot of potential in his campaign. You just need to be able to unlock said potential. So he does have a gold mine over here in Karakungor. He does start with a tier 2 capital, and he can very quickly start going into nasty skullcrab production, provided you have the King and the Warlord DLC. If you don't have it, you might want to just get rid of this barracks and just go directly into troll production. Get trolls, get their power, and use goblin archers, get the income as well. Now, here's the thing about Azhag's campaign. It's not about the campaign benefits. Though the 40 diplomatic relations, the vampire counts, can be pretty useful in terms of making diplomatic agreements. But what's really the selling point, as far as I see it, when it comes to Azhag's campaign, and why I prefer playing him as opposed to Grimgor or many other legendary lords of the Greenskins, it's two things. One, you get that 95% income from sacking settlements. So Azhag can get more money from sacking settlements than anyone else except Grom, who does have the cooking mechanic. But that's one significant benefit, but it's not the most significant benefit as far as I'm seeing it. Nor is it his skill line. It's his start position. The reason I mention that is because you start over here in the Northern World Edge Mountains. Yes, you're going to have to deal with Ungrim. You should be a bit careful when you're dealing with that, and also Drycom. But here's the thing. Because you start over here, you have a lot of diplomatic potential with quite a lot of factions that do border you. You can make a good military alliance with Kislev and help them out. You can make a good military alliance with the Empire or conquer the Empire. You can make a military alliance with Vlad, because that 40 diplomatic relations is basically going to overcome the aversion that vampire counts have towards greenskins. And beyond that, beyond the possibilities that you have diplomatically, territorially, you can take a lot of the territory that surrounds you on either side of the mountains. Like if we look at the campaign map here, with the exception of Lorem, every single bit of territory that's surrounding you is suitable climate, which is not something many legendary lords can actually say. Like all the way to Khemri, you have suitable climate. That means you have a significant amount of campaign expansion potential in during the course of your campaign. You're not just stuck down a single narrow road like Grimgor is. Because if you're playing as Grimgor, what you want to do in every campaign is deal with Kolak, then conquer the Mountains of Morn, then go for the Darklands. But if you're playing as Azhag, you can have a very dynamic campaign. That's a huge benefit in it from my perspective, because it makes his campaign better. But there's more in his campaign. Yes, you will need to do certain things for the victory conditions, specifically deal with Asland, but you can always ally with Kislev and make sure that happens. But beyond that particular aspect, there's another major aspect. So you're going to be fighting Ungrim in this campaign, but by defeating Ungrim or keeping him under control, that's going to give Skarsnik the leeway to wipe out Forgrim. Because Forgrim generally would lose the campaign against Skarsnik, but what happens is Ungrim bails him out, basically. Ungrim, the worst legendary lord of the dwarves, saves Forgrim, who's one of the better ones. But either way, since you're dealing with Ungrim, then Skarsnik should be able to win against Forgrim. If he can't, just go help him out and then knock some sense into him. But usually Skarsnik should be able to win this fight. Now, this is substantial from the following perspective, because if Skarsnik beats Forgrim, then there's no one to oppose Skarsnik. It really comes down to that. Like, if Skarsnik wins this fight for Zacharak, he's going to conquer all the territory all the way here to the Eastern Badlands province, maybe even Blightwater. And here's a nice little mechanic if you're playing as the Greenskins. You can forcefully confederate with other legendary lords of the Greenskins by just seeking them out and defeating them in battle. So all you really need to do as Azhag to gain control over Skarsnik's entire empire is just go find his army, beat it in battle, and you'll get the option to confederate with him. So Skarsnik should be able to do that. If he doesn't, you help him do it. Then you wait for him to conquer all of this territory. The AI gets more money than you on a higher difficulty, on any higher difficulty. Hell, I think the AI gets, even on normal, gets more money than you. Certainly will do on hard, very hard, and legendary. And you wait for the AI to conquer all this region while you're busy conquering other parts of the map. Then you show up with one army, a powerful one, should be under Azhag, really, or one of the most powerful armies you have. You defeat Skarsnik, you confederate, and you take everything he has. And then you do the same with Grimgor. Now, Grimgor is a much more difficult fight. But what this mechanic allows you to do, partly because, yeah, you have this good start position where you have easy access to both Grimgor and Skarsnik, what this mechanic allows you to do is build a massive empire much faster than pretty much any other faction in the game. This is a benefit that the Greenskins in general have, but I would say Azhag, of all the legendary lords, is uniquely suited to take advantage of it, because he can conquer large parts of the empire and just send one army to deal with Skarsnik, gain all of Skarsnik's territories, his secondary armies and all that. You'll defeat his main army, but you'll gain access to all of his other armies, and then you can do the same with Grimgor. I've played the campaign as Azhag. By turn 50, I had an empire that stretched all the way here from the Nablar country to the entirety of the Badlands to a significant portion of the empire by turn 50. And much of that came from the fact that I took a significant amount of territory when I defeated both Skarsnik and Grimgor. You can also do the same thing with Warzag as well, but Warzag tends to struggle in his campaign, when it comes to conquering territory. But you can certainly do the same thing with Warzag. Just be careful that you don't entertain any kind of diplomatic relations with either Skarsnik or Grimgor, because if you do, then what's going to happen is your reliability rating diplomatically is going to suffer. But that's why this is the kind of campaign I would not recommend for a complete beginner, because you do need to understand these kind of mechanics, play these mechanics, be careful about how you're playing these mechanics. But if you do know these mechanics, it can be a really powerful campaign. Finally, and number one, in terms of a campaign for a more experienced player, is Arkhan the Black. Now, the Tomb Kings are not a race you would want someone who's just starting the game to pick up and play. So they are a DLC race, makes sense from that perspective, because they do have some campaign mechanics that you need some degree of experience with the game to be able to tackle. Specifically, the way they recruit units. They don't have to pay for their units, they don't have an upkeep, but they do need to increase their unit capacity for their units through barracks chains, skull repositories, and all that kind of stuff. And in general, the Tomb Kings are the kind of race that can have very difficult early game, because they are usually limited to just one army until you get the research done, or you increase it through a book of Nagash over here. For instance, the 5th book of Nagash, which in this case spawned way over here. The spawning location of the books of Nagash is random, so you might want to start the campaign several times over when you're playing as the Tomb Kings in order to get good books next to you. Like getting the 5th book in particular can be a substantial amount of power in your campaign, because it gives you a lot of unit capacity for some really good units, the Tomb Guards and Tomb Guards with halberds, as well as that extra army capacity. The 7th book can be pretty good as well, but the 4th and 5th are, from my perspective, the best ones to get close to you in a campaign. Though I would say the books shouldn't... the Tomb Kings do certainly need some changes in terms of like how these books can be acquired, where they're at, all that kind of stuff. Now, here's what really sets Arkhan apart when it comes down to it. He starts extra army. That in itself would be one of the most substantial benefits a Tomb King Legendary Lord can have early on in his campaign. Because it means, since you have free recruitment, it means you can just recruit an army turn 1 and just pump it full of skeletal spearmen and skeletal warriors. But as you might notice, there are some other units as well. Arkhan has access to some vampire count units, and he can also buff them through his special skill line. He has access to them through the Grave Hell structure. Now, this structure is ridiculous. It gives you 4 capacity to Crypt Ghouls, Direwolves, and Fellbats at tier 1. Now, Fellbats, not really great units. Direwolves, kind of okay, but not too substantial. Crypt Ghouls, okay. They're not the greatest units in the world, but they're units you can get in large numbers at tier 1. You do start with some of them early on the first turn of your campaign, but you can also get quite a lot of them very quickly during the course of your campaign. And that's not something you should ignore when you are playing as Arkhan the Black. Like, you have the best starting position of all of the Tomb Kings. On top of that, you have one of the best starting provinces in the entire game. I'm not joking with that. Or one of the best starting positions in the entire game. Because you start in the Land of Assassins, in Araby. Now, here's the reason this is one of the best provinces, or the best province to start in the game. It's safe. There's no one that's going to attack you. There's only some factions in Lustria. Very few of them will make the trek across the ocean. And even if they do, by the time they do arrive, you will see them coming. Like, yeah, maybe Albrecht over here can try and attack you, but he's going to be vulnerable in trying to do a naval assault. And they're very easy to defend against for the most part. Like, the Sorcerer's Islands can be vulnerable, but you have one of the best starting positions in the entire game with 2 regions, and you can gain a province very easily. This is on Legendary, by the way, very hard battle difficulty, the literally highest difficulty of the game. You take your starting army over here, you get some treasury, and then you go for Lashiek. You get an entire province of free regions from turn 1. I can't think of a better starting position in the game. Like, there are some good starting positions, people who start with provinces, but it's like one or who can get control of entire provinces on turn 1. But usually speaking, a province of 2 regions. Arkhan, I think, is one of the very few that can get free regions from turn 1, and he has a ridiculous amount of power in doing so. That is what sets him apart in his particular campaign. Like, what you do, you take that province, you auto-resolve, you start getting Crypt Ghouls and all that kind of good stuff. Maybe you even do some global recruitment. Your second army is not going to recruit right now. You start getting, maybe Ushapti. Let's just go directly in Ushapti, why not? Right? And you get the full stack of troops from, you get a stack of troops by turn 3. You start getting a second full stack of troops after turn 3. And you throw all of that against Rapunzel, you take her out, and you secure yourself 2 really good provinces for a good economic output. Then you take the Great Desert of Araby, and you trade the Great Desert to the dwarves, who are going to like that, and in fact can become your vassal. See, the benefits with Arkhan don't end with his starting position. No, they just begin with his starting position. Because that starting position, the 2 armies that he has, the huge benefits that he has early on in his campaign, make him incredibly powerful. He can easily get to rank 1 in terms of campaign strength. Far more easily than any other Tomb King. And he has access to diplomatic vassalization, which a lot of factions don't actually have access to.
I will listen out of courtesy, but
now,
not
having
desire.
access to diplomatic vassalization, I would argue, is a really significant campaign benefit. The reason it's such a significant campaign benefit is it can be done diplomatically, like with the dwarves, right? You take the Great Desert Araby, you build the tier 1 structure, the watering hole, you sell it to the dwarves, because you don't need desert attrition immunity. You sell that to the dwarves. The dwarves are just going to be like, oh, we're now best friends with the guy who literally serves Nagash. And you can do this with multiple other factions. Now, if there's any issue with the Tomb Kings, it's the situation that they have to deal with other Tomb Kings, because you want to take over all of Khemri because of the pyramids you need for your campaign victory conditions. But that's relatively easily done. You do have diplomatic options. And the thing about the Tomb Kings is that they're the kind of factions which is faction, or rather race, that's supposed to grow stronger as you play them, because as you get more regions, as you get more territory, you get access to more unit capacity. And because your units are recruited for free, and your lords cannot be killed, they just get wounded, that means any battle you fight is what past a certain point in the early game is largely inconsequential. It doesn't matter if you lose a battle, because the only things you can lose from a battle are your heroes, but even they can get immortality. So instead of getting killed, they get wounded in battle. But here's the thing: that point where you just steamroll the campaign, you can do this as any Tomb King Legendary Lord. That point is much earlier in your campaign, or actually starts from turn 1 as Arkhan, because Rapance can't beat you, flat out can't beat you in her campaign. Cetra, he's got a miserable position. None of the factions that surround you can actually beat you in battle. To understand how powerful Arkhan is, I've seen this guy when played by the AI, because of the strengths of having multiple armies, the strengths of his starting position, the unit capacity he has. I've seen this guy when played by the AI, in AI wars really. I've seen this guy hold on to his initial province against the combination of Cetra with almost the entirety of Khemri behind him, Volkmar with some provinces, and Skarbrand. I gotta tell you, any AI that can survive Cetra with a massive empire, Volkmar, and Skarbrand is a powerful AI. But that's just because of the benefits that Arkhan has. He has more armies. He has more units than any other Tomb Kings. Most of the time when you're facing Tomb Kings, you're just going to be facing Skeletal Spearmen, right? Because that's the units they can master with no restrictions. If you're playing against Arkhan, you're going to deal with Fellbats, Crypt Ghouls, Direwolves. And that structure that gives them to him, it's a tier 3 structure. You can build it in any settlement. Like I can get one in Lashiek over here to get that unit capacity. I can build one in every single region in my entire campaign if I'm playing as Arkhan. That is a ridiculous level of power that Arkhan does have during the course of his campaign. By far and away the best Legendary Lord for the Tomb Kings. Does require some experience to really properly play the Tomb Kings, but they can be a steamroller with any Legendary Lord. But that steamroller starts at turn 1 if you're playing as Arkhan the Black. And that's all there is to say. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.